Hi, I'm Lorna and I live in the West Midlands of England in the UK. In my learning, designing, action and relationships, I seek to honour the histories, knowledges and stories of the people and ancestors of the places I live and work, and deepen the appreciation of the interconnectedness of human and more than human life. In doing so, I recognise that my history, intentions and actions have ripples into the future far beyond my lifetime. I share this work with gratitude to the Permaculture Women's Guild teachers, and especially to my PDC mentor, Amy Stross, to Libby McNamara and Maddie Holland for a cultural emergence course that I participated in, and for sharing social permaculture work so beautifully, and to Heather Jo Flores for stewarding so many beautiful opportunities. So for all of my childhood and most of my adult life, I've lived in suburbs with a garden, and I've worked for the same charity for 20 years, convening networks and creating social infrastructure that supports people to be co-designers and co-creators of their own communities and to influence public services. The house that I live in with my husband, we've lived in for 20 years. It's a semi-detached house on a quiet suburban street. There have been two previous owners. The house was built in the 1930s on land that has been farmed for over 1,000 years, as far as I can ascertain. We understand that the actual plot we live on was actually the site of an orchard, and the wider area that we live in kind of grew around historic market towns and then industrial villages, and is part of a conurbation that has a population of around 2.5 million people, including Birmingham, which is the second biggest city in England. So when I signed up for this course, I had intended to develop a design for land in the town called Dudley, where I work. However, a number of invisible structures came into play and constrained that for now. So I decided to produce a design for my garden, which is 6 miles away from that town. But I wanted the PDC to inform my work around place-based social systems, and I wanted my work to inform my design for the home and gardens that we live in. And over the course of my learning, I've become increasingly confident in weaving permaculture design explicitly into my work and conversations, which is evidenced by some of the posts that I've published online. And through my work, I've created a social lab. So I bring together a team and collective of creatives, artists, designers, dancers, architects, researchers, makers, encouragers and doers. And since winter 2020, we've been developing experiments to unlock the imagination of local people and discover the futures they dream of. We call ourselves time rebels after Roman Krishnarek's coining of this term, meaning people dedicated to intergenerational justice and long-term thinking. And taking this double certificate PDC and social systems course has been hugely influential in me shaping this work. In addition to sharing my permaculture learning journey through my work, I've also shared through a more personal medium publication and on Twitter using the hashtag #permaculturewomen. This has sparked interest among my friends and networks and led to a wide variety of conversations, sharing of knowledge, resources, seeds and plants, and me doing quite a lot of signposting to Permaculture Women's Guild courses. So for this design, the problem statement that I've developed is rooted in the challenges of interlocking political systems and dominant human cultures being imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, heteronormative, ableist, theist, patriarchies. The dominant economic thinking that we're part of is for growth, perpetuating the systems I've just mentioned, and an associated mindset that we as people tend to succumb to is an anthropocentric one. So in taking action to resist this at home, my husband and I have been saddened by actions of our neighbours who are cutting down trees and pulling up gardens to create drives for their cars. So as a result, our neighbourhood's becoming increasingly inhospitable for many species, which will be negatively impacting both the diversity and the abundance of life. The reduction in plants and trees will also likely have adverse effects as climate shifts and we begin to experience longer, hotter, dry spells. So long-term thinking is required to appreciate how systems are shifting and what we can do now. And in taking action to resist this through my work, the team and wider collective that I work with are frustrated by absentee and overseas landlords, empty high street units, neglected green spaces, and the kind of business as usual mindsets of local government employees and politicians. So we see the systems kind of preventing good people from being able to pause, connect, learn, reflect, and be creative and generous. So my vision is in three parts. My personal vision is around being nourished and connected to myself, to the earth, to the rest of nature, and to people through rhythms of daylight, darkness, twilights, moon cycles, and seasons. I have a shared vision with my husband to have gardens which are lovingly maintained, abundant with wildlife, scent and colour, and have inviting spaces to relax and spend time through all seasons. We're acting for the longer term as well as for now, creating habitats that will take time to mature. And through my work, I've heard local people in Dudley express repeatedly and in many ways a desire for a kinder, more creative and connected high street in town. And the people I'm now convening through my work are helping to deepen this vision, generating dreams for a regenerative high street in town, a place in which the more than human thrives alongside people. So similarly, my goals are in three parts, around three areas. I've got goals around resource flows that relate to my relationships with myself and others, to the land, to money, to food and other consumption, and the waste that we produce at home. I have a set of goals for our gardens, which are around structures such as sheds, storage, habitat creation, spaces to sit and eat, and seed collection, which I haven't done before. I haven't included goals for our home system, or what you might call Zone 1, because we've done a lot of work on this over the year before I signed up to the course. The goals for my work are around supporting a collective of time rebels to involve more local people and to secure funding to further develop social infrastructure and undertake work rooted in permaculture designs for urban land, so transitioning away from problematic extractive rental economies on the high street to public land and spaces which can be shared through land use agreements and forms of commoning. The site that I've created a permaculture design for is our house in front of Mac Gardens. So that's marked by the yellow boundary line in the Google Earth image below. There's an access drive to the rear of our property shown by the dotted line. And that runs behind 28 homes on our street. Each homeowner is responsible for the section behind their property, and the deeds do require it to be kept as an access route. But since either end of the driveway was gated about 15 years ago, the use by cars has decreased, and basically nature's taken over. There's now even an apple tree growing on the driveway behind my next door neighbour's property. So this base map shows the location of our house in brown, the patio and paths in grey, and an elevation that shows our land running from the access drive at the rear of the property down to the street. And this map is a representation of how we used our home and gardens for many years. We didn't spend a huge amount of time in the garden, and the front and rear gardens have mostly been lawn with some overgrown buddleia and lots of brambles. This map shows the use of our spaces shifting during the early implementation phases of my PDC design. And this was influenced in part also by pandemic lockdowns, which took us into the garden more. It also shows an aspiration to bring the access drive at the rear into relationship as a communal growing space with my neighbours. This sector's overview shows areas that benefit from good sun at different times of day throughout the seasons, which are based on my observations and instinctively where I've located my sit spots, because I do love light and sunshine. The strongest winds travel with the slope of our street from the southwest, but we're sheltered really from a lot of the wind by fencing all around the garden, and we'll be more sheltered as we plant more hedging. So wind and also noise aren't challenges. Our gardens are overlooked by other homes on our street, but fortunately we have good relationships with our neighbours. We actually enjoy chats over the fence or out on the street. I feel hugely grateful for the abundance of resources available for the implementation and evolution of my design. I'm loving making use of materials that I'm finding in the garden, some of them that I've previously purchased and not put to use. And the things that we need to bring in to realise the design are things like organic food and flower seeds that I've been buying from a seed cooperative, a little bit of compost for seedlings, some resources to create an eating area, so aggregate and decking. And I use things like sawn tree trunks from a local park where we can donate to a friends group and just take cut logs that I use for seating and kind of low tables. So I think water is going to be a critical consideration as this design evolves. In creating growing areas, I'm increasing the demand for water. So I intend that we'll capture as much as possible from the house roof and a shed roof. And I also intend to research more about grey water use on our gardens. This map shows the location of existing and planned components in the design. So herb beds and pots are close to the house. The vegetable and salad beds are in areas that get good light. I've put pollinator and wildflower plantings in a range of locations where I could find space. And new hedgerow planting will help to create more shelter, more food sources and corridors for wildlife to move. We've got a log pile by the pond for amphibians as well as for insects. I've moved the compost bin much closer to the kitchen, which was a game changer. And the bike shed and the tool shed are within steps of the back door, which has also made a huge amount of difference to kind of maintenance and activity and ease of things. I've got scented planting planned around my sit spots and the doors of the house. And I've been using a little part of the wall at the front of the house as an occasional share and exchange spot with neighbours. So this map shows some of the new edges created in my design, including new edges around water features, a gate that we've added to the rear fence, so that takes us out to the access drive, which we otherwise couldn't have accessed from my garden before, and growing beds on boundaries shared by neighbours to encourage sharing of fruit and herbs that I've put in or will put in. There's a shady area by our kitchen and the neighbour's extension, which I think might make a good spot for experimenting with mushroom growing. And we've got some shade in the garden from some of the small trees, and throughout the day, at different times of day, more of the shade comes from the fences and some larger trees that are a good few gardens away. The dotted lines on this map represent routes from the house to the compost bin or to the bike shed, to sit spots and out to the street, plus emerging unlikely routes from water butts to vegetable beds. The flows through our gardens seem to form a number of branching patterns, which I quite like, and some follow the actual paths that we have paving around the house and to the street. However, we don't have any paving across the lawn in the back garden. We like to amble around in bare feet. This map shows that before embarking on the design, our gardens were mostly lawn. We had a few established shrubs close to the house and a buddleia hedge. I had created a vegetable patch on a flat area at the top of the garden, which is where my design now locates the pond. And I've been given a cherry tree and some raspberry canes that I planted alongside a boundary fence. And this shows plants and trees after the design or during the implementation of the design. So it's been evolving. We've implemented key components such as the pond and planting native hedgerow rips. There's a sycamore that's self-seeded in the buddleia, which has become visible since I've cut it back, the buddleia that is. And I'm creating new vegetable beds along with wildflower and pollinator plantings. So there'll be much less lawn and 2 new seating areas. In terms of technology, transportation and energy, we'd already taken some steps to reduce energy consumption, such as insulating the attic and bay windows when we were having work done to the house. Some additional considerations that kind of emerged as I was working on this design included replacing an old gas cooker with an electric one, so that could kind of run on renewable energy, getting heavier curtains for winter, and reducing waste as well as electricity and petrol use. I want to review energy suppliers regularly, that's one of my goals. In terms of transport, we mostly walk, run or cycle, and we choose buses or trains over driving for longer journeys. We've got one old car between us, and I took a no-flight pledge around 20 years ago, so any overseas holidays that I might occasionally take with my husband have been by train and ferry. This is a visualisation of waste and nutrient cycles through our system, and highlights for me that while we are producing some food and refusing some packaging, reusing things, recycling and composting, there's still quite a lot to consider in relation to our impact on people and planet in terms of food, clothing and other goods that we purchase, and in relation to our water use. So in my closing statement, I've reviewed the work that I've done, and I'm satisfied that my final design aligns with the goals that I developed for our home and gardens. I have added goals as I've gone around kind of where the food I buy is sourced from and packaged, and around the cultivation of a collective growing space on the access drive that emerged as I was doing the design and became to feel increasingly possible. I don't think I've missed anything critical in my observation notes and research, except perhaps that we were heading for a global pandemic. Didn't spot that one. I think my final design supports the boundaries that I'd like to hold. So I'm really pleased about that. And in terms of limitations, I found it kind of the space limitation of wanting to balance kind of growing different kinds of food and wanting wildlife habitat. So just not having enough areas with good light to maybe have the abundance of wildflower meadow that I'd like, or the abundance of vegetable growing, but still enough. In terms of resources, I think we've made good use of available opportunities. We've been sharing tasks between us and using materials already in our garden or available secondhand. Analysis of the design highlights a new problem that we're creating that I've mentioned, which is an increased need for water. The pond got some leaks this year, so we've had to patch that up. So that also might add to water needs as well as creating vegetable growing areas. But I'm going to try and manage some things with green manure. We have created more habitat for wildlife and are reducing our impact on the planet over gently, gradually, over time. So hopefully that will all help. So in the design process, I completed all of the assignments in the foundations classes and around half in the core classes. I apply most of the elements in the advanced classes in some way through my work and welcomed the invitation to reflect further on these. I really found Jennifer English Morgan's Medium post useful, and I returned to them quite a lot in relation to my work, and have closely held the practices for cultivating a designer's mind. The social justice and decolonisation class has supported the alignment practice of my designer's mind and has helped me to grow my commitment to embracing different perspectives in practical ways, such as who I read and who I listen to on podcasts. And that's given me a confidence to respond to emerging conversations and opportunities in my organisation. So last year I made an invitation to white staff, of which we are predominantly, to engage in explorations around race. We've been using the Circle Way for our group process, which I read up more on and was really pleased to bring into this work. So the following slides are notes, diagrams and plans, which I'll very briefly talk through. So in terms of my personal boundaries, I'm pretty clear on what I say yes or no to, and I have some decisions around boundaries that I make according to context. In terms of my inner landscape, I've designed rhythms and routines that support my boundaries. So my morning rhythm includes journaling, movement, small cleaning tasks and reading. I try and get out every day. I try to tidy and reset the spaces in the home at the end of the day. And I've got weekly rhythms that include things like meal planning to make best use of food. And I seek to balance work and rest across each week. I've also considered layers of communal practices and rituals in my design. I found that these reinforce my personal practices and rituals, and in turn, my personal practices and rituals support these communal practices that I've designed into my life and work. So examples of this are introducing word of the year, reflection and planning prompts to a range of relationships in work. My team have embraced these seasonal celebrations, which led to two of my team members preparing the most beautiful winter solstice team gathering to close our work in 2020, which the images on this slide are from. In the convening call to the creatives, to the time rebels that I was bringing together, I used seasonal rhythms to frame and shape a year of activity starting in winter with dreaming. And I had really warm responses to that, with people saying they'd never thought of planning in relation to seasons, and very much like to see that and started to adopt it themselves. I've also begun introducing acknowledgement of the future and other long-term thinking and rituals activities into my work with people, drawing there particularly on Joanna Macy's work that reconnects and some resources from the Long Time Project. So I've considered invisible structures in terms of relationships with neighbours on our street, which are good, and economic and legal structures that could affect my design. Because my husband and I own the house and both have full-time incomes and don't need much capital for the design, economic considerations aren't a worry. And we don't actually, the design didn't involve building anything more than a shed, so I haven't needed to research any planning laws in relation to the property. Similarly, in a kind of parallel way, my team had been considering invisible structures as part of systems analysis that we'd started back in 2017. And these images are from some work we were doing to identify forces that impact on how the system works on the high street we're based on. So we identified invisible structures such as the extractive rental economy, the limited range of commerce and trade going on in the town, poverty, power and agency, so people having or not having it, creativity and collaboration, and social interaction. And taking this PDC has really helped me to better understand these and given me the courage to talk about them in an organisation which doesn't tend to do so publicly. I've also found it useful to do some zone mapping in relation to social systems in my work, especially as pandemic lockdown restrictions radically altered what was possible in a place. And this zone mapping has sparked an exploration by one of the architects I worked with when I shared it through some discussions that we were having. So well worth doing. My next few slides are basically the implementation phases of this design. So we started in autumn 2019 in terms of some of the structures in the garden and creating a pond, getting ready for hedgerow planting. Then in spring, I'd ordered the hedgerow and planted it and started creating some veg beds, wildflower area. This was my kind of patch design for pond planting, which then went in spring 2020. Summer and autumn last year was more kind of clearing areas for spaces to sit, and my first attempt at seed collecting, which I think went quite well with wildflower seeds. And then this spring, we're creating the eating area. We want to add more water collection, grow food again, and I want to introduce more flowers. And then as we move through into autumn this year and spring next year, I'm going to turn my attention to our waste and energy use, where my food comes from that we buy, experiment with mushroom growing, and start to think about some all-season seating in the garden, and continue to worry about water collection. So my maintenance plan, which I keep in an Airtable database, has got some daily and weekly tasks. It's got some monthly tasks, and then it's got seasonal tasks, so spring through summer, autumn and winter. and my husband and I kind of check in on things that the house and garden needs over Sunday dinners. That's become a little bit of a rhythm as well in our house. The species list that I've put together includes birds, mammals and plants in our garden. I've tried to identify some of the insects, but I don't know a lot about insects. But I was delighted to spot a frog last year in our garden, waiting for more frogs to appear in the pond. My components list includes the food that I want to grow, wildlife habitats to create, some of the structures and storage components of the design, and also features that kind of focus on our enjoyment of being in our outdoor spaces. I've put a few notes in from my stakeholder interview. So one was with myself and the other was with my husband. We had quite a few activities and desires in common that made the core of the design, really. And then I've also dropped a note in there about how we kind of find out about what people think through my work. So we don't use interviews or questionnaires. We're much more creative in the way that we do this. So there's a little example there in my slide deck of some of the things that we do. And this is my final slide. So a note on my observation and site assessment collection. I found the Scale of Permanence Trello board just absolutely brilliant place to capture, store and organise my research, observations and site assessment notes. I was adding maps as I generated them for the design, and I was drawing on research and observations to inform the design and the maps. So, for example, research and analysis of weather data helped to inform the water layer of my design. So in closing, I've hugely enjoyed this process and the many expected and unexpected yields that it's already producing. And thank you so much for listening.